Welcome on into the show, everybody. It is episode 7, season 8 here on the Hooper's Log, and we're here on the Podbean, Apple Pod, all these other places that we do our show at for the Lead SM, the Lead Sports Media for Hear You on November 2nd, 2021. That's right. We are here to discuss what's gone on here in the first 2 weeks of the NBA season. Really, in the first half month, with October being over now, and where we are overall in the landscape of things. And, looking at the standings, glancing around with what we've got and where we are, again, it's just an apparent obviousness that we have a very early standings into where we are. And it's no rip on anybody that's starting early or anything, because we're going to talk about one team today in particular, and then we're going to talk about one player in particular and really the ramifications of the league and where it is and kind of where it's been for the last 2 decades in all reality, the last generation of players. And we're going to get into that today. The NBA, right, where we are, and if you look at the teams at where they are in the standings, etc., one of the teams that's we've got a good podcast going on right now is for the Detroit Pistons. Unfortunately, they're 1-5, so they clearly don't have any expectations. One of the expectations they've had for this year is that they are going to be a team where, when you look at them and you look at them moving forward, they've got a lot of growth potential. They got a lot of great things coming down the pike for the future, but currently they don't have any expectations for the current year that we are at, which is 21-22. They just don't have anything moving forward. I mean, obviously, Cade Cunningham is finally getting started. He scored his first couple of points over the last week or so, last couple of days. Our show, our Pistons pod, Motorcade 313, they will be starting here shortly. And if you want to hear anything about them and their revamped, restarting process of where they are, feel free to jump on here on the Lead Sports Media Pod Network in regards to where we are with them. So again, jump in on Motorcade 313. And you'll learn more about them and their process, really their rebuilding process, as to where we are today. Now, I wanted to talk about one team in particular on this start to the season. We look at the top teams in the East: New York, Washington, Miami. Even Charlotte's up there. They're 5-2 with where we are in the recording session of this today. And the one team that's fascinating to me is Chicago. Now, we look at the scenario overall within the Eastern Conference, and we see the overall landscape of where it is. It all looks upside down. Brooklyn's 4-3, Milwaukee's 3-4, Boston's 2-4, Toronto's, Philly. I mean, they're both 4-2, 4-3. They're both all right, but it's just flipped upside down right now, and it's so early and everything. But I think the one team that we all need to just take a good little peek into moving forward in regards to where they are and what kind of team they're creating is the Chicago Bulls. I mean, you look at their team over the last couple of games. They beat Utah. They had a great game against the Knicks last Thursday. They look like a team in regards to the revamped roster that they've created. Vucevic, DeRozan. They've got a team now where, when you look at their overall roster, I know they got Alex Caruso, even Lonzo Ball's there. They've got a fascinating bunch of guys. Zach LaVine, obviously, as usual. But when you look at their overall structure of how they're laid out, with Billy Donovan as their head coach, they've got an opportunity now to really make some real headway with their forecast of what they've got coming forward. Again, they're not built in the very modern day realm of what you would expect in a organization of today. They've got a team that more or less looks like a team that's structured for what the league used to be, which is mid-range style, finesse, all these other things happening. They look like a team where, when you overall break them down, you're like, wow, they would be really, really good back in the mid-2000s, a mid-range powerhouse. They could find ways to dominate you inside and out, particularly more regularly. But now, if you look at them, you're like, wow, they're making it look good, making it look easy early on in the season. They've got Boston, which they played yesterday. As of recording, they haven't played yet. But then they play Philly back-to-back games, Wednesday and Saturday. Monday they play Brooklyn, Dallas Wednesday. And then Friday, I think that will be the game I think we can all testify to on the 12th of November, when they play at the Golden State Warriors. Then they play at the Clippers, and they play at the Lakers, and they play at Portland. That road trip, I think, is going to be the determining initiation of where we see the Chicago Bulls in regards to what their record actually shows right now. That is no rip on them. My point is that What they've done this year, a lot of people were very skeptical because of the roster they'd put in place, the new pieces, the coach, everything that they finally put together. People were like, "Well, what's the I don't see the hype. It's just kind of another team revamped a bunch of pieces that at one point were good, but not so much anymore, just based on what we've seen overall. Over the last decade, really. I mean, they were a very very slow churning team. Derrick Rose, Taj Gibson, those teams, Carlos Boozer, etc. And they were really, really, really good Eastern Conference teams. But with where the league was starting to go, they seemed to be kind of caught back in time. And currently, with the way their roster is structured, it still feels that way. But with how they've started the season, it's very, very tough to sit back and be critical because, again, they've got a very veteran-laden roster. Overall, with what they are signifying with Billy Donovan and how they could be moving forward, this confidence for them moving forward early on in the year in their first 6 games shows to be the fact that maybe them as what they are and how they are constructed can keep them, afloat early on in the year. Like I said, give it another 2 weeks, then we'll finally know where we are with the Chicago Bulls and what they overall look like. This first month for Chicago, I feel like, is a solid trial run for where we think they could go for the future. But where they will go now will be very determinant on that West Coast trip to Golden State, LA, both teams in LA, and then obviously Portland. Road trips early on in the year are a good determinant of where you are now because chemistry, travel, being on the road, being gone, being in a different routine, different time zone, different place, different structure, that can change a lot in how you overall view what your team's going to look like moving forward. And again, I don't want to be the bug to say it's too early in the season to really determine anything, but it still is. And a couple weeks from now, that will be when we know, okay, Chicago is at this pace, this level, this section of where they should be in the season. Obviously, they have to keep winning to get to that point to be seen as that way. But where they are early on in the season right now is a great testament for a good confidence boost for them early on in the year. It also allows for fans to get more hyped in regards to, hey, they're 5-1, they're playing great basketball. We should go out and see a game or something. This is where you kind of rally around where you could potentially be something great. It's the same thing for the Knicks, the Washington Wizards, the Miami Heat. All 4 of those teams are teams where you could look at and say, man, they're probably fringe competitors to be in the NBA playoffs to even do anything and go deep. Obviously, Brooklyn, Milwaukee, we're looking at them and we're like, they still got a shot to do something because they're big-time names, big-time teams. They're going to turn it around. They're going to be fine. But when you look at the New York Knicks, the Bulls, the Washington Wizards, and the Miami Heat, these are opportunities where if you just take care of your business and do what you're supposed to do, you turn into an opportunity in a scenario where you say, okay, this opportunity for us is to seize it and grab it and move forward and to start something that we could start taking with us into the winter. We all know the winter is one of the toughest times in the NBA. Right after Christmas, January, the dog days, it's back. Regular seasons, the season of being regular again in regards to mid-October all the way through mid-April, is going to be a scenario where we look at it and we say, yeah, January is going to be brutal again. Prior to the All-Star break, guys are just kind of, trudging to the finish line of where we can get to, where we can have some kind of break and overall, time lapse to stop what we're doing and let our bodies heal. The Chicago Bulls, Wizards, Heat, Knicks, they need to build upon this now so that they can grow a narrative of, hey, we're trying to be for real now, and we're trying to grow into the teams that we've been building for the last 5 to 6 years when people thought we were in the dumpster and being trash. Now we've got an opportunity to turn that narrative around and be for real. And one of these 4 teams is going to come out and be one of those conversation pieces. From a confidence perspective, believe that it's going to be the Chicago Bulls. And I think it's because of their coaching, their organization, and what they've been trying to build. And now that they've added multiple pieces to become something that you can be, reckon with and be real with, I look at them and I say, wow, I think the Chicago Bulls out of those 4 teams, again, not to say the Knicks don't have a shot, because the Knicks went to the playoffs last year. They were legitimate. They played great basketball. Not to say that they don't have a legitimate shot, the New York Knicks, but the Chicago Bulls, with what they've built and how they are, and the team and the players that they have surrounded and have been around, they're hungry. They're hungry for the success. They're hungry for reality, and they're hungry to put this thing moving forward to be the real deal. And when you beat a team like Utah, like they did the other day, and now you've got the situation laid out in front of you where you're playing Boston, etc., and then you got the West Coast trip coming up here in a couple weeks, it's going to be a fascinating play out for what it's going to look like for the Chicago Bulls. And I'm trying to tell you right now, they're a team right now, at least from an early on perspective. So many teams. I mean, you even look at the Western Conference, Utah, Golden State, they're teams we would expect to be up there at the top. And if Golden State's up at the top right now, and then finally they get healthy, look out, they're going to be a conversation piece for a championship. And that's real. That's not sitting here being fake. Oh, Chris, it's so early. Well, you were just saying it's early. No. Golden State has a situation and a scenario and a roster where once it's fully put together, a guy like Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, all those guys, when they get healthy and get right, they're a team where you sit back and you say, this is just what they do. And they're getting back to that point where this is just what they do. And if they get fully healthy and fully revamped after the Christmas break and all those things happen, you're looking at a team where it's like championships are on the horizon again. And if that becomes the case, now you start talking about all-time great legacies with guys like Klay, Steph, and Draymond. Denver's up there, Dallas is up there, Minnesota's playing good, and LA's still getting their feet wet with their new roster. There's in regards to the Lakers, there's a lot still to be hashed out and played. The bottom of the Western Conference, boy, I tell you what, the Clippers, Houston, Oklahoma City, and New Orleans. It's weird seeing LA or the Clippers in there. I mean, obviously my Spurs are 2-4. I mean, whatever. It's just so early in the year for most teams, but I'd say Golden State and Chicago in regards to moving forward through November is a very, very interesting dynamic to watch just from what their roster looks like and how they're playing here in November. You don't win a championship in November. No one's winning an NBA championship in November in how you play. In fact, how you play right now, in all intents and purposes, is not indicative of what you're going to do in mid-April, May, and June. It's just not going to be that way. But to see how it kind of creates itself and grows, and the nucleus of how the season starts to, overarching grow itself and become where it is, come Christmas time, come, mid-January, Martin Luther King Day, All-Star break. This is the time where you see the nucleus of what your team and what your scenario and what your roster and your narrative is going to slowly start to be, and then see where you might want to be come those times of the year, and based on, trades, changes, injuries, how everything's going to play itself out. This is where you start to grow that confidence as a team and say, you know what? We at one point in this year, we were 8-1. 8-2, 10-3 to start the year. And look at us now. Maybe we're not playing great basketball, but there was a point where we were at that point and where we were playing great basketball overall. So that's where we're at with those two teams overall and where we want to be all in all. I wanted to say this about a certain player. We're doing a quick pod today. I wanted to say this about a certain player and where we are with what we're doing today in regards to all things hoop and the Hoopers log in general. Ja Morant is a guy where when you look at him and you look at his success and what he's done over the past however many years, a guy like Ja Morant is averaging the second or third most points in the NBA right now at 27 plus points per game. And you look at the Memphis Grizzlies and you look at them as a team, and they're kind of in that middle pack. They're 3-3. They're not playing phenomenal basketball. They're not playing to the best degree of where they want to be and everything all together. But you look at Ja Morant and his skill set and what he's done to this point in his career, and in all reality, he's still in the very, very early processes, early situations, early scenarios of his career into what he's doing, right? I mean, it's kind of like this initiation period in the league that is kind of unfair to some degree into where you start to take and get to see and overall get to know what you are and who you are as a unit or as a player and how things move forward, right? And let me explain what I'm saying. A guy like Steph Curry, right? Nobody took him seriously until he won his first couple MVPs and his championships, right? Before 2015, the year, not even the championship, but even when they had that hot start in the 2014-2015 season, when they started like 12-0 or 15-1 or something, they started off crazy hot, kind of like where we are in this point in time of the year. When they started off crazy hot as a team, you know what people were saying? I'll believe it when I see it. They normally get hurt. Steph's usually hurt all the time. You look at guys like Klay Thompson. They aren't fully fledged players yet. Draymond Green's kind of iffy. Draymond at that point in his career wasn't seen as a defensive dynamo. He was seen as a guy where, it's like, all right, he's kind of a guy off the bench, whatever. People forget about those days of Golden State. People do. And when you see a guy like, Ja Morant doing what he's doing, obviously there needs to be like a nugget in the back of your head of this guy is in the conversation for turning into potentially the best point guard in the game. He's 22 years old, third year out of, I forget the college he's out of because it was so tiny. In fact, let's look at that real quick. What school did Ja Morant go to? I'm sure you're yelling at me right now. Chris, how do you not know that? The dude is a monster, blah, 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 blah. How do you not know what school Ja Morant went to? Trust me, it's a tiny school, and when you have to memorize all these other schools to know where guys came from, it's tough. He came from a tiny, tiny, tiny school in college, kind of like Steph Curry in some regard. Not to say Ja Morant is Steph Curry, but you get the point, right? Murray State University. Hilarious. We all remember that when he was there. That was the same time when a guy like Trae Young was doing what he was doing. It's like, okay, Trae Young's at Oklahoma, Murray State with Ja Morant. He's interesting, but how can he do it when he plays against great opponents? Well, look at him now. He's in the NBA, and he's playing like one of the best point guards in the game. My point being is there's this initiation period in the league where, unfortunately, you have to go through a set time frame of things that you have to do in the league. And what happens is you have to kind of build this overarching narrative of things that you have to do, unless you have instant success where you go to playoffs and you win and you go deep and you know, like a Trae Young. Trae Young has been to an Eastern Conference Finals now, and he had an opportunity to go to an NBA championship, you know, at a very, very quick, rapid pace. And so now Trae Young's being kind of thrown in that conversation of, is he in the conversation of becoming a superstar? Is he? Is he getting thrown into that narrative as well because of what he did early on? From the national landscape perspective, when you're playing deep into June, early July, you got an opportunity where you sit there and you say, okay, maybe this guy can be seen as an ultimate superstar moving forward in the league. Not to say that people doubted Trae Young, but to say that when you start overall comparing and seeing what's going on, you start to say, okay, Trae Young is a guy that now he can be the leader of a team to be successful. And nobody is doubting that. Nobody is sitting there and denying and saying, well, Trae Young's a joke now because he can't do anything. No, he's gotten to the Eastern Conference Finals. That's kind of where Ja Morant has to now take over his own narrative to go, you know, at least one, maybe two rounds deep in the playoffs to get to a Western Conference Finals. That say, well, damn, he averaged 27 points per game in the first couple months of the year. He played unbelievable. He did this. He did this. Now he's going to the playoffs. Now he's being successful. Now he's getting to here. Okay, great. Now we get into, you know, next year, 2022, 2023, and we see Ja Morant, and we see a guy, wow, he's doing it again. He's holding his own. He's being where he's at. Multiple All-Star appearances. Now we got to take this guy seriously. And the unfortunate part about Ja Morant and his success is that it's not a curated success from the standpoint of he plays in a big market. That's the one frustrating part about the league. It's been this way for a generation. If you don't play in a big league, or excuse me, a big market, you have to go through an initiation period a little bit longer than most guys. Look at LeBron James. We're just going to be honest here. LeBron James back in the early 2000s, 2003, 2004, 5, 6, 7, even maybe a little bit of 2008, before he won his MVP. That's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Basically after what he did against Detroit when they got to the NBA Finals and got swept by the Spurs, that was really, from a national perspective, people were still paying attention to LeBron because he was amazing. But from a overall narrative, legitimate, let's see what this guy will do in the landscape of taking him seriously. Because y'all forget, in the 2006-2007 season, LeBron James was second team All-NBA. That was a joke. Like, this dude should have been, obviously, seen as one of the best players in basketball. But from a media perspective, people were like, he's still this high school phenom. He's got all this hype around him. He's still not succeeding in the playoffs. What makes him a big deal? Well, obviously, after what happened against Detroit, finally people were like, oh, yeah, no, we have to take him seriously. We have to take him seriously. And then in 2008, when, especially 2009 when they flamed out against the Magic, people were like, man, he still can't get over the hump. He still can't get over the hump. And that was half the reason why LeBron left Cleveland to go to Miami, because he could never get over the proverbial hump to do big things. Boom, he goes to Miami. Bigger market. Obviously better players. But he then wins championship after championship, gets to the championship over time. People are like, no, you can't really hate him anymore. This is crazy. This is ridiculous. But unfortunately, that took almost his first 7, 8, 9 years of his career to do. And he played in Cleveland. Obviously his second stint in Cleveland, we all know that's a whole different narrative. But his first 2 or 3 years in Cleveland, people were like, is this guy really for real? Da, da, da. And this is LeBron James we're talking about. Ja Morant has no kind of backing or following as of a LeBron James, and we all know this. So for LeBron James to have to struggle through this narrative of a small market, obviously a guy like Tim Duncan in a small market, we all know what he had to go through. Nobody really took him seriously ever. We all either said it was Pop and Duncan, or we said it's because the players around Tim Duncan, or because nobody takes him seriously because they're in San Antonio, it's Tim Duncan. Tim Duncan's an all-time legend, we all know that. But from a marketing, grappling, people taking the narrative seriously, Tim Duncan, the only reason they took him seriously is because he kept bombing through the Western Conference and winning championships through the Western Conference. If he played in the East, if Tim Duncan played in the East and did what he did, people would be like, it's just Tim Duncan, whatever. And they don't really take him seriously because it's nice and slow and droll San Antonio. It's not flashy fun LA. It's not flashy fun Miami. It's not flashy fun New York. It's small town America. The best part about the NBA is, fortunately, small town America still dominates for the most parts in regards to the most aspects of the NBA, which is fortunate, because if they didn't, I'm telling you what, there'd be some big problems, money-wise throughout the NBA. But that's the one positive and the one good thing about where we're seeing a guy like Ja Morant succeed, which is in Memphis. Because obviously for the next 2-3 years he's under contract. We have to know what he is going to want to do based on the success of the Memphis Grizzlies moving forward. And knowing that he's only in his third year of his rookie deal, he now has an opportunity to create this narrative and this opportunity to be seen as a legitimate player. A lot of people are starting to say, why isn't Ja Morant being talked about in the big name perspective and in the big market narratives that are moving forward throughout the NBA? This has been the conversation for a generation. Since MJ left the league, it's really been about, well, how can we start to talk about small market teams and make them seem like they're a big part of what we're doing here in the NBA? How can we ultimately grow that portion of the league and make it a big deal? And a guy like Ja Morant can help that narrative push forward again to make it seem like, Memphis is a big deal. And I think, unfortunately, what the media is still doing is they still look at the Memphis Grizzlies and they compare them and corroborate them in a narrative of, well, there's still kind of that grit and grind conversation. Not to say that that's what they still think they are, but because they were so conditioned for, 10 years of what they had in Marc Gasol and Zach Randolph and all those guys, Tony Allen, that slow churning Mike Conley type atmosphere that they had there in Memphis, which was fantastic and successful, but it wasn't glitz and glamour. And that takes years and being conditioned to see that it will work for what they're doing now. But until then, unfortunately, large America, the city-based portion of America, is going to sit there and say, well, grit and grind worked better than this, and Ja Morant's a better player than all those guys from a talent perspective. But overall, you look at it and you say, it's not as successful as grit and grind, so I can only just go back to the grit and grind. You know what I mean? So it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that that's the way it has to be, because I hate it too. But when you look at a lot of the great players coming out of small markets in the NBA, a lot of them, even at Jimmy Butler for a while. I mean, Chicago's not a small market. Chicago's never a small market. Miami's never been a small market. But Jimmy Butler goes to the Heat, and he was in middle America. Chicago, Jimmy Butler's not a good example. I'm trying to think of another player, but Jimmy Butler is still an unbelievable player. He obviously helped lead his team to the NBA Finals during the bubble season. He did an unbelievable job. But even Jimmy Butler gets that kind of, in-between look because Chicago wasn't very good. Miami got to the finals with him, but he's constantly in that, Jimmy Butler's never been in the conversation of a Ja Morant per se, because he just hasn't, in regards to scoring the basketball, flashiness, excitement. He's had his moments, do not get me wrong. Defensively, he's had his moments as well as a player, etc. I don't know why I brought up Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler was a really, really, really bad example. But you get my point, right? Certain guys, for some reason, don't get the pub that they should based on where they are, how they play within a team, the narratives that they then create. Jimmy Butler created a narrative that he was a drama queen, drama king, whatever you want to call it, in Minnesota. Obviously in Chicago with Dwayne Wade, and then in Miami, finally he got there and had a good attitude. But before that, he had the attitude that he had. And so that kind of stuck with him for a minute until they got successful in Miami. And then finally he started slowly shedding it away. But again, It's not like he played in LA where his narrative can change rapidly. You know, you look at Russell Westbrook, look at him. Before the season, a month ago, we look at a Russell Westbrook and we said, damn, he's an all NBA 75 player, triple double king, all these things, he's going to bring some promise to LA. Within a week, Russell Westbrook's trash. Russell Westbrook can't do anything. Russell Westbrook is just absolutely horrible, blah, blah, blah. But if Russell Westbrook would have gone off and played unbelievable basketball and helped them winning games, it'd be like, oh, Russell Westbrook's just the greatest thing since sliced bread. And that's exactly what it would have been. Those narratives switch so fast, rapidly, constant in those cities. Whereas you play in a Chicago, Memphis, anywhere, in these Chicago's not a small market. Don't get me wrong. Chicago is not a small market. But people from the West Coast and the East Coast like to look at Chicago and be like, outside of Michael Jordan, it's like, all right, well, and Derrick Rose, and what are they really, So you look at that, you go down, Milwaukee's in that conversation. Obviously, Giannis is an all-time legend, and we all talk about him, and we all discuss him, and we all go over him a lot. But in the national narrative, just because his name's weird and he plays in Milwaukee, people are like, well, Giannis Antetokounmpo, I mean, he's an interesting name, but I mean, what are we doing here? It's Giannis. He's got a weird name, and he's this. That's from a national perspective. From us inside the NBA, we all know Giannis is an all-time legend. We know this. But when you start getting into that narrative of you got to get over that hump to be a great player and an all-time legend, Giannis was already in that conversation 3 or 4 years ago when he led his entire team in all stats and they still were in the playoffs and being a solid team. We all know that Giannis was already in that conversation as a great player. But from a national perspective, nobody knew who he was from a casual fan perspective. Nobody knew who Giannis was until what he did this past summer. Really. I mean, from a who's this Giannis Antetokounmpo? Who is this guy? And then bam, he starts dominating in the NBA playoffs, NBA finals, and bam, he wins a championship. Now everybody really knows his name. They're like, oh, that's the Greek freak. He's a monster. That guy's an absolute beast. He won a championship. He knows what it takes to get it done. He stayed with the same team. Look at him. Oh my gosh, he's amazing. But before that, people still were clowning about his name, and they still do clown about his name. That's the situation Ja Morant has to be in. It's the Ja Morant problem within the NBA. It sucks. It's a small market issue. It's been a small market issue for a very long time. And you have to get over quite a bit of hurdles. You have to grow that pedigree. You have to kind of go through the rugged. You got to go through kind of the initiation period to do anything that is anything regarding a narrative within your name. That's the one frustrating part about where Ja Morant is. He is an absolute stud, unbelievable player, great NBA player. But he's still young. He's in a small market. If Ja Morant was playing in New York right now, people would tout him as probably the best player in basketball. If he was playing in LA, doesn't matter, Clippers or Lakers, one of the greatest players in the history of the league. He plays in Miami. He plays in a big market. God forbid if Seattle ever get a basketball team again, he plays there. People are, oh my God, he's just unbelievable. What this guy is so crazy good. He plays in Memphis. He's gotten to a couple of fringe playoff opportunities. What is an 8th seed, etc. And he's had his opportunities, but he's not in the position of power yet. And once he gets to that position of power, then people from a national casual fan perspective can sit back and say, oh, damn, that Ja Morant, that's a bad man. Instead, it's us within the forest of the NBA circle of the media and all this stuff. See him and we're like, how was nobody talking about him? How was nobody talking about this guy? It's still early. It sucks. It's stupid that we have to say it this way. But it's still early. He's in the MVP conversation after the first month of the year. That's a fact. He is. Without him, that Memphis Grizzlies team, we don't know what the heck they'd be. They'd probably be in the bottom rung of that league, with Houston and San Antonio and right now the Clippers and those teams, the Pelicans. They'd probably be there without Ja Morant. In fact, they might not even have a win because that's how important he is to his team. He's that important. That's why it's MVP. But you have to grapple that narrative, and you have to play unbelievable basketball just to even get there. It is an unfortunate circumstance to have to rely on those things, see those things, hear those things. It really is frustrating that it has to be this way. But the fun part is we get to see that narrative grow through Ja Morant. We get to see him play harder and harder and harder to try and win the approval and get the recognition that he really so deservedly should get. But all in all, Ja Morant's issue of not getting the national attention that like most teams will in the big markets is a natural thing that the league has gone through for really an entire generation. Okay, episode 7, season 8. We're getting to that kind of that time where, season 8, episode 8, season 9, episode 9. You got to, the numbers, they start to flip-flop, dyslexia, etc. I don't have dyslexia, but you get my point. The W, they're recapping the WNBA season, pardon me. They're recapping the WNBA season and what happened, where we're at moving forward. Logan, Akil, we've got Bailey, I think Cassie. Man, I'm bad at names. I'm really bad at names. They're all doing the W, and they're doing an unbelievable job. Please listen to their show Wednesday on the 3rd of November and listen to them all the way leading up until the big events coming up for the WNBA. They are killing it. Their show is fantastic. Every time I tune into the lead with the W, every time I turn into the W, I'm hearing people who have a firm grasp of what's going on within the WNBA. And they sound like the leaders of what the WNBA media need to be. And they have a very, very keen, cordial, intimate relationship with what the WNBA is turning into, which is really turning into its own brand and cult and great version of basketball. Like I've said in the past, the WNBA and women's basketball is some of the most fundamental basketball you'll ever watch in your life. If you ever want to teach your kid, doesn't matter what gender or whatever they are, playing the sport of basketball, when you watch them, the WNBA, you should watch them. If you want to teach your kid to play basketball, have them watch the WNBA. The fundamentals are out of this world. They're perfect in regards to the fundamentals of the game, in regards to their shooting style, in regards to their spacing of the floor, in regards to their low post presence, in regards to their ability to see the floor differently and set perfect screens. Everything they do fundamentally in WNBA is absolutely wildly beautiful. And the W here at the Lead Sports Media has been doing a great job promoting the WNBA, and I really heavily suggest you listen to them every single Wednesday when they're here on the Lead Sports Media podcasting network. So again, thanks again for listening, everybody. Season 8, Episode 7 in the books. Episode 8 will be next week on the 9th of November. Thanks again for listening, everybody. Have a good one.